Okay, did that start anything that you like?
Not for
Because it
me.
is recording on this computer.
Okay, so I'll have to ask you for a copy of it so that I can put it into the show.
All right, that'll be good. We could arrange that afterwards.
So, so anyway, welcome everybody to CometWatch with a difference. Due to some Skype issues, we're actually going to use Zoom, which means we can now actually see, well, you can see us. So I'll introduce, well, my co-host, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
It's Neil Norman.
And would our guests like to introduce themselves, please?
My name is Daniel Green.
And I am David Levy.
Welcome
it's really
to CometWatch.
an honor to be here now.
Your third show, I believe, with us, David.
Yes, it is. And I'm really very happy to be here. And I'm just loving this. It's too bad we had problem with Skype.
It is, yeah. But those things are sent to try us, and we triumph over them. Well, tell you what, let's quickly go through the shipping forecast. It's me and Neil, and this is some of the discoveries from the BAA's Comet Section visual observations page. So January the 7th, recovery of 2017 B1 periodic Christensen as 2020 W3 reported.
January the 7th, recovery of 2010 B2 periodic Ys as 2020 Y1 reported.
Again, January the 7th, recovery of 2016 J3P stereo, not formally reported.
January the 8th, discovery of 2020 Y2 Atlas reported.
January the 10th, discovery of 2021 A1 Leonard reported.
January the 10th, discovery of 2021 A2 Neowise reported.
January the 10th, discovery of 2020 X4 Leonard reported.
January 11th, the recovery of 2014 E1 periodic Larsen reported as 2020 W4.
On January the 11th, Warchop Boomplod reports a Maya Group comet in real-time C2 images.
January the 15th, discovery of 2020 W5 Lemon reported.
January the 15th, discovery of 2020 Y3 Atlas reported.
January the 15th, discovery of 2021 A4 Neowise reported.
January the 15th, discovery of 2021 A5 periodic Pan-stars reported.
Excuse me, January the 15th, discovery of 2021 A6 Pan-stars reported.
January the 15th, the discovery of 2021 A7 Neowise reported.
January the 16th, recovery of 2013 EW90 periodic Tenegra as 2020 Y4 reported.
January the 16th, Warchop Boomplod reports a Croix Group comet in real-time C3 images.
January the 17th, recovery of 2013 A2 periodic Scotty as 2021 A8 reported.
January the 17th, Warchop Boomplod reports a non-group comet in real-time C3 images.
21st of January, Robert Pickard reports a Maya Group comet in delayed C2 images.
21st of January, Masanori Yoshino reports a Croix Group comet in real-time C3 images.
21st of January again, Warchop Boomplod reports a non-group comet in real-time C2 images.
January the 22nd, Peter Barrett reports a Maya Group comet in an archival C2 images.
22nd of January, recovery of 2015 J3 periodic Neowise as 2021 B1 reported.
23rd of January, discovery of 2021 A9 Pan-stars reported.
23rd of January, discovery of 2021 B2 Pan-stars reported.
January the 25th, Pian Sun reports a Croix Group comet in real-time C3 images.
January the 28th, Peter Barrett reports a non-group comet in archival C2 images.
January the 28th, Peter Barrett reports a Maya Group comet in archival C2 images.
29th of January, recovery of 2010 A5 periodic linear as 2020 Y5 reported.
2nd of February, Path Begat reports a non-group comet in real-time C3 images.
February the 4th, discovery of 2021 B3 Neowise reported.
February the 6th, Discovery of 2021 A10 Neowise.
And also February the 6th, the update.
Okay, so this is the current magnitudes and observable regions. If there aren't any recent updates, always try the German Comet Group or Yasuichi Yoshida's page for information, or the Liga Iberoamericana de Astronomía for observations. So we kick off with 2020 R4 Atlas, magnitude 9, bright. It's in conjunction, last visually observed January 2021.
Next, we have periodic stereo 2021 A3, magnitude 10, fading and poor elongation.
2021 A2 Neowise, magnitude 10.5, fading, and that is 60 degrees north to 60 degrees south. It's best in the evening, last visually observed February 2021.
2019 N1 Atlas, magnitude 11 and fading, 0 degrees north to 60 degrees south, best in the morning.
2020 M3 Atlas, magnitude 12, fading, 90 degrees north to 15 degrees south, best in the evening, last observed January 2021.
Next is 141p Maccults, magnitude 12 and now fading, 55 degrees north to 45 degrees south, best view in the evening.
2020 S3 Erasmus, 12 magnitude, fading, in conjunction, last visually observed December 2020.
2021 A4 Neowise, magnitude 12.5 and brightening, 90 degrees north to 5 degrees north, all night object.
156p Russell Linear, 13th magnitude, fading, 90 degrees north to 15 degrees south, evening, last observed January 2021.
Next is 398p Botini, magnitude 13 of fading, 80 degrees north to 40 degrees south, best viewed in the evening.
Yes, Neil, I know, I've got it this month. 29p Swachman-Vachman, okay, SW1, 13th magnitude question mark, it varies, 85 degrees north at 35 degrees south, best in the evening, last observed January 2021.
Next is 2020 T2 Palomar, magnitude 13.5 and brightening, 85 degrees north to 30 degrees south, best viewed in the morning.
2019 L3 Atlas, 13.5 magnitude, bright, 90 degrees north to 10 degrees north, in the best in the evening, last visually observed 2020 December.
Next is 88p Howell, magnitude 13.5 and now fading, currently poor elongation.
And finally, but not least, 2012 T2 Pan-STARRS, 13.5 magnitude, fading, 10 degrees north to 50 degrees south. It's an early morning object and last visually observed in September 2020. Right, that was a fun one because you actually got to see my face going through this. Not many people do, and as I say, SW1 is always my favorite one for tripping up on. And I'm sure Neil was glad he didn't have to deal with it this month.
Absolutely.
So anyway, we have two guests with us this week. One of them is one of our a great friend of ours who's returned on at least two previous occasions. I think he's set the record for actually having two CometWatch appearances in the same month. Welcome back, David.
Thank you. It's really an honor to be with you today.
It's always great to have you. And of course, welcome Daniel to CometWatch.
Thank you.
Now, most people probably, we all know David from his comments and his presence in the group. So, Daniel, could you tell us a bit about yourself quickly so we can, whilst we get started?
Well, with regard to comets, I have been an astronomer at Harvard University since 1980. I worked very closely with Brian Marsden until he passed away 10 years ago. I also worked with Fred Whipple, Zdenek Sekanina. I started the International Comet Quarterly in 1970s, late 1970s with Charles Morris. I think 78 is when we started it as a place to collect observations of comets, physical observations of comets, to complement the astrometric observations that the Minor Planet Center collects. And we maintain an archive of that. I also in addition, I've been working for almost all of those years with the Central Bureau for Astronomical Telegrams, which announces new comets. And I was thinking, as you did those list of comets just now, that you did not mention the new comets that we've put out in the last 24 hours, which you can see at the Central Bureau website and also the Minor Planet Center website. And we have 2 comets that we're working to put out even as we speak. Will probably go out this evening off the PCCP webpage. They have been confirmed as comets. In addition to my archiving and announcing and studying of comets, I've been observing comets almost all my life since I was a teenager. In addition to doing visual observing and photography myself on my own, I am involved with some big observing projects. I work fairly closely with the larger surveys as part of announcing new discoveries. And I'm a team member of a program in Tibet with Tao Chen, observing telescopes at the highest observatory in the world. There in Western Tibet. And I am also a team member with David Ballum, working with a Canadian project with the Canadian Space Telescope and also the Victoria telescope to observe comets. So I am basically eating, sleeping, drinking, thinking comets all day long, every day. It's my specialty. I dabble in other things too, like meteors, small bodies of the solar system. I sit on the IAU Small Bodies Nomenclature Committee, which is involved with naming minor planets as well as comets. And that's a fun project to be on. There are only about a dozen of us on that committee. We always have interesting things that come up as far as naming issues. Comets usually aren't that controversial, but we do get our 1 or 2 controversial comet names a year that we have to go through with the committee and debate. So the most recent one, which I will bring up, is ZTF.
Yes.
ZTF is the Zwicky Transient Factory, which is a really bizarre name for the current program at Palomar with the 48-inch Schmidt telescope there. And we had been calling comets Palomar that were discovered with that telescope for some time when there wasn't a person. It's a very common thing that we will name comets for observatories or telescopes. That goes back many decades. And all of a sudden, someone there got upset because we named a comet Palomar, and they filed formal complaints and said, we want this to be called ZTF. Well, for those of you who know comets, we don't usually have abbreviations for comet names. This is not something that, I mean, the abbreviations we have had are acronyms that people can usually pronounce as kind of like a word, like pan-stars or linear or something of that nature. And ZTF just kind of didn't sound right. So this had to go to the committee for a vote. And what we ended up doing was basically deciding, we deadlocked on changing the name, decided we weren't going to change the name of existing comets, but we voted that for future comets discovered by the ZTF survey that we would name them ZTF. And we've had 1 or 2, I believe, in the last few months. So anyway, that's a little synopsis of the stuff that I do. It can be rather complex, and I probably get 100 emails a day that I have to deal with, which is kind of overwhelming at times, but that's sort of my life in a nutshell. And of course, I worked very closely with David and Carolyn and Gene Shoemaker with their comets and their discoveries.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, we really went through quite a bit back in the mid 90s with that event. And it's really good to see you again, Daniel. But I think the last time we really had a good communication was with 255P, the comet that I found on Yom Kippur morning in 2006. So it's been a long time, and it's really good to see you again.
Yes, yes. Well, are you going to find any more comets, David?
I doubt it. I'm still looking. I'm still looking visually. I love the search, but I doubt I'm going to find any more. It's just fun to be looking for them. But you never know.
What are you up to now, David? How many comets?
It's it's 23. Wendy, you got it. It's 23.
One.
And
That's a pretty good number.
it's 23 now. I still speak with Carolyn every Monday and really look forward to that. And I believe she does as well. She is 91 and she just got her COVID shot and she's doing very, very well. And she says hello to everybody.
Wow. Well, David, please say hello to her for me on Monday when you talk to her again.
I would be happy to do that, Dan. And anyway, usually the quote that I gave to this group was before we actually started recording this, but I usually begin a presentation or a meeting like this with a poem. And I have another one that I wrote. I think I've only written 2 in my life. This one I wrote in 2003. It was after the Columbia fell out of the sky, costing 6 lives. And I wrote a little poem that I would like to share with you right now. It is called Sonnet for the Seven. And it goes like this. The ship stands tall. The sky looks down, so soft. A second sun lights up the launching site, and slow and straight, Columbia roars aloft past birds, past planes, past air, to space and night. Around the earth 6 million miles she sailed, with 7 lives, yes, 7 dreams and more. They saw a world whose nation's borders paled. They saw a world unstained by crime or war. Blue world alone in a sea of space and time, for 2 weeks joined by a tiny special moon, looked out as one to far-off worlds sublime. But time had come to head for home, so soon. So far they flew, yet so much more is nigh. So short their time, too soon for souls to fly. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Dan, one of the fun announcements that you made regarding odd comet names, my favorite one of that is the assassin one. I really love that.
That one went to the committee and was heavily debated.
I'll bet it was.
Yep, yeah. There were a few people in the committee, myself included, who thought it might be an inappropriate name, and the assassin group was very adamant and insistent on using the name.
Well, yeah.
The
Well, I've
vote
got
was taken. It was a divided vote, but the majority ruled that it would be used.
Well, okay, that's great, but still one of my favorites. I have a little story about the most recent comet, which I'm associated with, and that's Comet Jarnac, which is P/2010 E2, I think. Anyway, that one was originally reported to the MPC as an asteroid, and then someone else detected cometary activity in it. And I believe it is a tradition over at the Central Bureau that if someone discovers a comet but doesn't recognize it as a comet, then that person loses the rights to name it, and instead is named for the observatory. If that is correct, Dan.
Well, I will correct in the sense that comets are not named by discoverers, but for discoverers. Minor planets are named by discoverers. Comets are named for discoverers. That's the difference.
Well, thank you. But in this case, it was given the name of the observatory, which is our Jarnac Observatory. There's a little story behind that. Jarnac Observatory, Wendy and I named in honor of the original Jarnac cottage that I used to go to near Montreal when I was growing up. It was my grandfather, my father's father's cottage, and he just loved going there and he loved it, and so did I. I named the observatory Jarnac after my grandfather had long since passed. But anyway, the interesting thing about it is that when the comet that Tom had picked up was named Jarnac, I can just imagine Grandpa just loving it and running around heaven, delighted that his cottage is now, the name of his cottage, his beloved cottage, is now attached to a comet in the sky. And I'm sure he loved that, and I loved that, and Wendy loved that. Tom, not so much, but we did. We loved it. And thanks, Dan. I don't know if I'd ever told you that story before.
No, you hadn't. That's news to me. Very, very nice.
Well, thank you. Yeah, there's an awful lot. There's an awful lot that the two of us have in common. Going back many, many years, we've had a good friendship. We've argued a lot, but we've maintained our friendship over the years, and it's really kind of good. It's really very good to see you again.
Yes. For those of you who may not know, when David mentions arguing, there isn't really a lot, but there was one very notable case where we argued, and that is in the pages of Sky and Telescope magazine, where we were asked to do a very rare dual column, pro and con, about Pluto being called a major planet. Yeah. And I took the stance that it's not a major planet, and David, of course, took the stance that it is a major planet, and that was one of our quote arguments, unquote.
Yeah, that was a good one. We've had others, but over the years we've maintained a good friendship. And I
stayed at your house in Tucson, David, many years ago.
Yes, you did. In fact,
30 years ago.
The walking stick you gave me.
Oh, you still have that?
I believe so, yes.
From the Grand Canyon, yeah.
Yeah, and but that's a long, long time ago. But there is a lot we should be talking about at some point. But I'm really glad to hear your voice and to see you, at least virtually, at this point.
Yeah, feelings mutual, David.
Yeah, thank you.
I was going to say, I hadn't heard that story about the naming of the Jarnac Observatory until today either. So that was a new one for me.
Well, it's very special. My first visit up at Jarnac, the original one, was to watch the Perseids in 1962. And Grandpa felt that I was going to fall into the pond and drown because I was sitting on the dock right next to the water. And so every half hour, he set his alarm and he got up to make sure I hadn't drowned yet. And I saw 112 meteors that wonderful night. And that was really an awful lot of fun. But then there was a story in 1992 when I saw some very bright meteors through clouds at Stellafane. And I went to you and to Brian the next day, and Brian was extremely excited about that and even sent out a circular that I and a couple others had seen a pretty good display, because he felt that meant that the comet Swift-Tuttle was about to be recovered, and he was right. Swift-Tuttle
Those are the Perseids. Yeah.
The comet of the Perseids was recovered just a few weeks after that meeting. But that's another story, my first major meteor watch.
Yeah.
I have to admit, if I wanted to go, when I was in the States, if I wanted to go meteor watching, I would have to go out to Grafton, because that was my nearest dark sky area to where I was staying near Albany. And of course, the nice thing about Grafton being a state park, you could look towards Mass over the hills, and if it was dark enough, you could actually see Messier 31 with the naked eye. So that was a fun thing to do when you were out looking for meteors, we would have a competition to see who could be the first person to actually see the Andromeda Galaxy with the naked eye that night. It would be interesting.
Nick, when you were living in upstate New York, were your sky dark enough that you could actually see the Triangulum Galaxy with the naked eye?
No, these are trifocals, so that's why I image rather than observe at the telescope. It's very difficult for me to use a telescope with glasses now. So, and of course, I'm short-sighted, and I can't make out the triangulum at all with the naked eye, but I could just about get M31.
Well, that's
So-
pretty good if you can see M31, but at our retreat, I've been able to see Messier 33 with the naked eye, and occasionally I've glimpsed it from here, but not every night.
How often on this podcast do you get into discussions of light pollution? Because light pollution is a huge issue for comet observers.
I think we
We
have
did
actually
brush on it.
discussed it before.
Yes.
Yeah.
With Richard Kowalski gave us some tips on how to solve light pollution.
Move to a remote site.
No.
No.
Nick, would you like to explain how Mr. Kowalski
Yes, he
deals with light
suggested using a laser, handheld laser pointer, pointing it at the sensor on the actual offending street lamp.
Oh, that's a good one.
pollution? Yes, or
That's one way of
catapults.
doing it.
When I was a teenager, I went out with a BB gun and shot the street lights out.
Yeah.
I also had one of those 1 million candle watt power hand torches with all the D cells in. And I actually used it and zapped the light sensor with that. Because I had the binoculars out and I was just seeing what I could star hop really that night. And I had a visit from the gentlemen in uniforms, because they were a bit concerned because suddenly these lights were going out and all around us one area. So I got a visit and I showed them. The moon had just started to rise over the rooftops as well. So I was able to show them the moon and everything. And they went away quite happy. They just simply told, don't worry about the lights going out in a certain part of Cohoes. It's safe, nothing to worry about.
Yeah, I've run in my life into more than a few policemen when I've been out observing in a dark sky, wondering what I was doing in the middle of the night.
Well, saying about Pluto, today in North Arizona, there was an amateur radio contest going on to mark the discovery of Pluto. I had a Facebook notification about it, but I haven't got any antennas up for HF. So unfortunately, I couldn't join in, but I do know it was going on, and it sounds like they had a lot of fun too.
We're almost at the centenary of the discovery.
Sorry, Dan. Yeah, one thing about Pluto, I wanted to emphasize that my disagreement about the status had nothing to do with science. It was personal. And the reason was that I was so close with Clyde, and we were very good friends. And I knew that it would get him, and that as Clyde was getting older, he would talk over and over again about his terrifying fear that Pluto would be demoted. And it was, and that's the reason why I disagreed with it. It was personal and not scientific. However, I want to emphasize that the International Astronomical Union, which really is responsible for the demotion, and which indirectly employs you, Dan, I think is a wonderful organization for a different reason, a very specific reason. In 2016, in April, I was all excited because my PhD thesis was about astronomy and Shakespeare. And I was all set to turn on the television and have everyone celebrating the 400th anniversary of the Bard's death in April 2016, a number of years ago. Nobody mentioned it. I think CNN might have put it on once, but none of the major networks here in the United States said anything about it, except the IAU. They came out with a news release simply listing all of the asteroids moons, extra solar planets, and everything else named after characters from Shakespeare. And I was overwhelmed by that consideration. And I wrote to them and I thanked them profusely for what they did and for paying attention to Shakespeare's passing like that 400 years later. And also mentioning that we had this little disagreement about Pluto. Well, they wrote back and they said, well, we disagree with you. We think that Pluto should not be a major planet. However, we think that the problem was not so much what we did, but the way we did it. And we wish we had had someone like you with us at the time to sort of give us training on how to handle a decision as big as that. Anyway, we kind of let that go. I think the IAU has done some wonderful, wonderful things over the years. And one of the best is that they got you, Dan.
Well, yeah, well, I was present at the vote in 2006.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, I didn't vote for the resolutions that you think that I voted for because I thought they were so horribly written. I was opposed to having Pluto called a dwarf planet. I thought that was absolutely the wrong thing to do. And that whole meeting was such a zoo. You know, I've never seen an IAU General Assembly where astronomers went crazy at each other. There was just arguing going on left and right. It was a very heated topic. It took over the entire General Assembly for the most part. And they ended up taking it out of the hands of solar system astronomers and putting it in the hands of astrophysicists who have nothing to do with the solar system because they thought they would be better balanced. And they ended up coming up with these proposals, including calling Pluto a dwarf planet, which was not entirely, there were astrophysicists involved in that whole concept of dwarf planet status. And it was just very horribly worded. And I will tell you, David, there were 4 resolutions and I voted against a couple of them, and Brian was sitting next to me. And Brian said, "Why are you voting against this? You're supposed to be voting for it." And I said, "Brian, because it's so horribly worded. I can't vote for a resolution that makes Pluto a dwarf planet." You know, it's just, and putting it in the same boat as Ceres was absolutely crazy. You know, they just, based on size alone, Pluto and Ceres have nothing in common. So it was, yeah, it was kind of crazy.
Well, Dan, I'm very proud for you that you did that. And that was one of my objections to the wording of that. They could have worded it better. They could have done a whole lot differently, but it's still, it's not really a scientific issue, but it is remains a major political issue in astronomy. The crazy status of this world out there.
Yeah. Well, I certainly understand your point, David, and you did a biography of Clyde Tombaugh, and I completely understand. You were very close to him, and you know, you can't touch that kind of stuff.
And I understand your view absolutely. And
well, you know, the thing is, David, what was interesting about Pluto, and this isn't completely irrelevant from the perspective of comets, by the way, because trans-Neptunian objects are thought to be very connected to comets. So I think it's a very relevant topic. And Pluto was not being archived properly, you know, back prior to 2006. And what happened was you really didn't have an entity. The Minor Planet Center handled all other trans-Neptunian objects, but it wasn't allowed to handle Pluto. So the Minor Planet Center, where I worked at the time, up until 2010, the Minor Planet Center was archiving observations of Pluto, but they weren't allowed to publish them. They weren't allowed to publish orbits, believe it or not. So what happened with that vote was that the Minor Planet Center officially got control of Pluto. It gave it a minor planet designation, and now they publish observations and they do orbits, and it's treated just like every other trans-Neptunian object. And of course, our point was that, you know, I don't know if you know this story, David, but I came back from that meeting which made world news, that Pluto was no longer going to be considered a major planet. I don't like the word demotion. I like just that it was recategorized. I came home from that meeting. My
Agreed.
sister is first chair violinist with the Minneapolis Symphony.
Is she? Really?
My sister got on the phone with me and said, Dan, we're doing Holst the Planets a couple months later in Minneapolis. I talked to my conductor, we'd like to have you come out and to do a visual kind of, they broke it up, it's I guess 8 movements because there are 8 planets. So they wanted to have me in between each movement to get up and do a slideshow and talk about each planet. And so because of the situation, of course, they wanted me to do this because Holst did his piece, the planets in the 19 teens before Pluto was discovered. But my sister and the conductor thought this would be appropriate to do because Pluto had just made national news. So I went out and did this. And my sister told me right before I went up that one of her best friends had a daughter who was 7 years old. And her daughter was so in love with Pluto, and she had Pluto all over her room at home. She had, Disney Pluto, everything Pluto, the planet, anything to do with Pluto she had. And she was very upset about what had happened. And she wanted to talk to me and meet me afterwards. So I talked about what happened at the IU. I tried to be very respectful. And afterwards, the mother brought this young girl up to me and introduced me. I knew it was coming. And she had these big eyes and said, she was worried about Pluto. And I said to her, you know what? We made Pluto more special by what we're doing. We have singled out Pluto. We are going to focus on Pluto. We're sending a spacecraft to Pluto. And don't you worry about Pluto. It is not going to be treated any less. If anything, you'll see it will be treated even more importantly. And she had a big smile after that.
That story is wonderful, Dan. I had not heard that before. Thank you for sharing that with us. Speaking of the planets, I must add at this point that Wendy and I got married to the planets. The theme from Jupiter, there's an absolute piece of music, a few chords that comes in the middle of the Jupiter theme that is one of the most beautiful pieces of music I've ever heard. I'm sure most of you are familiar with it. That is the piece that Wendy and I went down the aisle to on our wedding day.
That's really
which
neat.
Happened to be March the 23rd of 1997, the same day that we discovered Comet Shoemaker Levy 9 a few years earlier.
Wow.
Wow. In fact, saying about Clyde, I actually have a copy of the book he co-wrote with Patrick Moore about the discovery of Pluto in my library upstairs. And I found that fascinating reading. I almost wonder if the fact that because where they were looking in the original observations before Clyde got involved, if they hadn't only barely missed it in the first instances, because I think when they went over the old plates, they found pre-discovery images in some of the earlier plates that were done beforehand.
Indeed they did. In fact, Lowell himself, one of the plates that he took, Clyde was able to find images of Pluto on it, and the images that Lowell had just totally skipped over. That really is pretty interesting. There's still books being written. In fact, there's a new one that's coming out soon on the Edson family, on Patsy's family. And of course, it has a chapter on Clyde and Pluto and other things in it, but there's still a lot of stuff. That's a very interesting family. I know that Clyde's daughter, Annette, and his son, Alden, are still living in Las Cruces. And I think that everyone in Clyde's generation has passed by now, but there is the next generation, which is the same as ours, which is still going strong.
Good.
Well, Pluto was discovered on January 23rd, 1930.
February
And we have
23rd.
pre-discovery
February.
observations going back to 1914. So I see that the earliest one at Lowell was in 1915, but in 1914, there were also observations at Heidelberg and at Harvard Observatory in Cambridge. Very interesting.
There you go, Dan.
Yeah.
You know also that in all my life, I have attended only one astronomy class at a university. That's from the time I was born until today. I've only attended one formal astronomy class. And that class was given by Dan Green at Harvard a number of years ago.
Well, actually, I've visited Harvard once. It was back in, trying to think, I went to the States in 96, 97. So it was probably the early 2000s. And they were having an outreach event. I think the talk was about black holes or something. And it was, then there was the observational meeting up on the roof. And to get there, we were actually allowed to go through and look at some of the, I think it was a beautiful brass refractor that they had there. I could be wrong. It's quite a while ago for me. And went up on the roof, and then we managed to look at the Jovian system through 200 Meade LD or LX 200 or 2000. But that was something, actually being there for that.
Yeah, there's a lot of history at Harvard Observatory.
Oh, is there ever?
Yeah, there were a bunch of comets discovered right there from the balcony of the 15-inch refractor dome there, which is a historic landmark, the 15-inch refractor built in the late 1840s. But yeah, there were some astronomers, Tuttle, I believe, discovered a couple of comets from the balcony there. They have little comet seeker refracting telescope and go out and hunt for comets. So back in the 1860s, 1870s.
Yeah. There is so much, you just sort of feel the history as you're there, but also as such an active, present research center, one of the most active in the world in astronomy and astrophysics. Unfortunately,
we've lost the comet people, though. Harvard had a lot of comet people there, and they've kind of gone away. So I moved to the Earth and Planetary Sciences Department at Harvard in 2010. So I left the observatory at that point.
Yeah. Guess we'll have to catch up a lot on what's happened over there in the last 10 years or so.
I think the only other observatory I've been to in the States is up on Mount Hamilton, the James Lick, and that was back in mid-80s. And I think that what they did actually have an open night there. Some of us actually got to use the equipment in the dome, but the rest of it was all done outdoors with much more modern instruments. I still think that the older instruments are much more fun. You haven't got to worry about go-to and getting clonked.
Nick, after getting clonked, did you know that James Lick himself is buried underneath the original big telescope there?
That I didn't know.
Yeah.
I didn't know that either. That's interesting.
Yeah, he is. He's buried underneath the telescope.
Yeah.
That isn't going to happen to Wendy and me because we already have our plots already chosen and we've paid for them. And so when the time has come for us to shuffle off, we will be together just a little bit north of here. The only thing I wanted was that our graves be faced so that our heads are pointing to the east, so I can get a good view of all of the morning comets.
Yeah,
that works.
Yeah.
Neil, you're quiet.
I'm listening with fascination to this. I was just going to ask. I want to know the gentleman's opinion of a comet that is upcoming in a couple of years' time, 2024. It's going to actually be about, but it has been recovered. It was recovered last year, I believe. And that is a comet that I know Terry Bugtoy was dying to see, for example, is 12P Pons Brooks, because this is a Halley type comet, and it's a little bit temperamental. It tends to outburst an awful lot. So I wonder what their thoughts are on that one. I think it was the last round in about 1954, I believe.
Yeah, well, yeah, that one has been shown to. I worked with Mike Meyer and Suichi Nakano on identifying comets going back a millennium, more than a millennium, almost 2 millennia, in the old ancient literature. And apparently that comet occasionally does get up to naked eye brightness. And it all depends on the apparition. It'll be quite heavily observed, I'm sure, this time. It is an interesting comet. As we were talking before we came on the air before, Neil, about just how many more comets there are now than there used to be. You know,
Absolutely.
there used to be just a handful of comets that you would talk about, and I was thinking that Brian Marsden died in 2010, and Brian set up the new current system of comet designations in the early 1990s, which was quite ingenious. And one of the things that he did was he started a numbering system for short periodic comets, such that they get a number once they have been observed at a second return to perihelion. And Brian was very careful about ordering all the comets in the order in which they were found to be periodic. So Halley is 1P, Enki is 2P, BAA is 3P, etc. And at the time of his death in late 2010, we were in the 200s range. I don't know if maybe actually I can look it up here, but it's about 250, I believe. We were up to 250 numbered short period comets, and let me just see exactly what the number was here. But we're now well over 400. So we have gotten to more than double the number of short period comets. I think it was actually around 200P when he died, and and what that shows is all these CCD surveys that have come online. Even in 2010, they were going fairly strong, but since 2010, we've really picked up with the Pan-STARRS survey, Catalina, Mount Lemmon surveys. The linear survey has kind of fallen off by the wayside. We've lost a couple of other surveys, such as NEAT at Palomar, but we're about to come online with some more. Atlas has been really big at finding comets, and what the interesting thing about Atlas, they use 1 meter telescopes, I believe, and they're actively about to open up 2 southern hemisphere telescopes, one in Chile, one in South Africa. And we've been talking for years and years about the need to have a southern hemisphere survey. We really haven't had a good southern hemisphere survey since Rob McNaught was doing the Uppsala survey down at Siding Spring. And he lost his funding about a decade ago. Found a lot of comets there with the Uppsala Schmidt.
I think he's
but
up to
all of a
82.
sudden, what's that?
He actually got 82 comets, didn't he?
I don't know the number, but yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. It's a lot of comets. But now Atlas is about to come online, and we've seen what Atlas can do with northern hemisphere comets. They found a lot from their northern hemisphere sites, and they're about to come online with 2 southern hemisphere telescopes. And they're going to find a lot of comets, because I think the southern hemisphere is very ripe for finding comets that you can't see from the northern hemisphere, especially comets that are coming in from the south towards the sun. So it's very interesting. We were talking also about how these surveys are getting so faint now. Pan-STARRS is getting down to 23rd magnitude, and we're having difficulty when these comets are found, many of them, because they're so faint, and some of them are very far out, and they don't show cometary appearance. So,
Mm.
you know, we're having to, you know, we put them on the PCCP, which is the possible comets confirmation page that the Minor Planet Center hosts. And a lot of times they sit there and they don't show cometary activity. Some of them have been getting put out with A/ designations, which means asteroidal but comet-like orbits, meaning generally when they initially set that up a few years ago, about 5 years ago now, it was supposed to be comets that were basically on parabolic type orbits, or very close to parabolic orbits. And they've kind of loosened that up, unfortunately, I think, because they haven't actually defined it. So they're now putting out objects that have orbits that have eccentricities of 0.9 or greater. I don't know where their cutoff is, and they're giving them A/ designations. And numerous of them, we actually have about 4 or 5 A/ comets right now that have not been announced as comets, but are cometary. So we're sitting on a whole stack of things. And unfortunately, the Minor Planet Center is very overwhelmed right now and has had some leadership problems. Be nice and not say anything more than that. But they have not put comets as their priority. And of course, everybody in the comet community knows this. And everybody in the comet community is very frustrated with the Minor Planet Center right now. We're trying to work on that problem. The director of the Minor Planet Center has just resigned because he was very heavily criticized by many in the community for things that were going on there. And we'll see what happens. They're supposedly up for a contract bid next year, and it's possible that there may be some other observatory that will win the Minor Planet Center and move it away. But at any rate, we're still working with some frustration with their comet end of things. You were listing at the beginning of this show, I guess that's something you regularly do when you list comets that have been observed over the last month or two. You listed a bunch of SOHO comets there, and I guess stereo comets too. And so those sun-grazing spacecraft comets have been, of course, neglected by the Minor Planet Center for a very long time, really pretty much since Brian died. Brian had a passion for the sun-grazing comets, and he worked very hard on those comets. And I left the observatory there in the Minor Planet Center shortly before Brian died, so I kind of got out and was doing going in a different direction. But yeah, there is a very big problem. There's a huge backlog of SOHO comets, stereo comets going back a decade. It is a big problem, and of course, most of them don't survive perihelion. So, you know, people are sort of like, well, ho hum, it's hard to get excited about putting these out if they don't survive perihelion. But every once in a while, you get an interesting object. There are some that actually there are a couple that have short period comet numbers because they've been observed to return multiple times, even if only with the spacecraft cameras, because they're very faint when they're far from the Earth, and so we don't see them from the ground when they move away from the sun, unfortunately. But there are a few exceptions to that, and of course we all know the big exception that happened a couple months ago, the eclipse comet. It's very rare that we see a comet during an eclipse, and that was really very fun. That SOHO and stereo both, I believe, observed that comet, and it was seen from the ground. It was not seen visually, I don't believe, but it was detected in photographs taken from Chile and Argentina. So that was, I believe that was 2020 X3 SOHO, if I'm not mistaken.
It's interesting to look at the data. It's interesting to look at the data because from between like the years 1990 up until the year 2000, comet discoveries, the most profitable year was 1999 when there was 42 discoveries. And if we look now, scooping up into the year 2000s, it's quite 65, 66, 70. There was 74 last year. So like you say, all these surveys are really picking them up. I mean, Pan-STARR's on 237 at the moment, it says here, which is a huge amount, isn't it?
I just wanted to ask Dan a personal thing. Dan, are you still in touch with your friend Mike Rudenko at all?
Oh yeah, we're
I know you're good friends with him.
yeah.
I would like, I'm wondering if you could send me his email address. I
Sure,
would like to
I'll do
get
that.
in touch with him again. Thank you.
Okay, for those of the rest of you, Michael Rudenko is he was the last person to discover comets visually from Massachusetts, and he did so three times, I believe, in the 1980s.
Yes.
And and the context is Massachusetts, like England, is very bad in terms of weather and very bad in terms of light pollution. And it was absolutely remarkable that he was able to do that. But yes, so Michael is back to working at the Minor Planet Center. I worked very hard to get him onto the Minor Planet staff shortly before I left. And he is the one person who's mainly doing comets there now.
Mm.
So he's working very hard at it, and he's doing a great job with limited resources. So yeah, we're in touch regularly regarding the comets that are being announced.
Oh, that's wonderful news. Well, please give him my very best. Michael and I have a very important connection. Both of us shared our first comet discovery, Levy Rudenko, in 1984. And
I didn't realize that was the first for both of you.
it was the first for both.
Oh, that's very, I hadn't appreciated that. That's very neat.
And then when we shared a second one, Okazaki Levy Rudenko, a few years later, and when it was announced that way, and Michael called me over the phone and said, "We have to stop meeting like this."
Yeah, Mike and I were roommates before we both got married. We were both working at the observatory when we were young, and we roomed together in an apartment for a year. And he and I got to be big tennis buddies. We used to play tennis a lot together, and we actually played up until a year ago, but COVID really knocked everything out.
Yeah, as it's knocked out almost everything for all of us.
Yeah.
But it hasn't knocked off Zoom or Skype or any of these
Right.
other.
Well, I didn't even know what Zoom was until COVID.
Me neither. So what would you say what comet would you like to have seen, Dan, that was before your time? I mean, for example, I would like to have seen the 1910 daylight comet, or the 1843 one as well.
Oh,
Just
yeah.
2 examples.
Yeah. Oh, there are so many comets, but I suppose that if if you said you got to name one right now,
Yeah,
I would probably say the 1577 comet, which
Me
was
too.
Yes.
intrinsically one of the brightest comets of the last millennium, and it was a centerpiece of my PhD thesis. So I have a very close attachment to that comet. As part of my thesis, I reduced the observations of that comet, and I actually went to Copenhagen Library, the Royal Library in Copenhagen, and actually sat down with the original observing notebooks of Tycho Brahe, who wrote in his notebook the distances every night of the comet from various naked eye stars, and would describe its brightness, and he would make drawings of it in his notebook. And that was really an amazing experience to sit down with the actual notebooks that Tycho Brahe wrote in. So yeah, that was an amazing comet.
Definitely.
It's my favorite one too. Not so much, partly for what it looked like, but partly for Tycho because of his, his observatory was, I think, the only one in existence at all throughout time that actually had a prison attached to it. And
Wow.
so you better followed what Tycho had said, or else.
I think for me, I would want to go back to see perhaps one of the earliest observations of Hawley P1, because I know the Chinese actually found it and recorded it, and when they did the math, it was actually found to have been Hawley's comet that they actually recorded. I want to say something like 365 BC or something. I know it's definitely well back in that area, but it'd probably been interesting to see how bright it was at that particular apparition as well.
Do you pronounce it Hawley? there's
Halley or Hawley is accepted as being the correct way.
Yeah.
I'm a Halley person.
But it's not Haley. The general public
no.
in this country, there's a group called Bill Haley and the Comets, which was a
Yep.
famous group in the 1950s and 60s. And people in this country who don't know comets, 90% of the time they'll say Haley's Comet, right?
Ooh.
I got to tell you a story about that, funny story about that. Back at the time of Halley's Comet in the 1980s, we were getting many requests for interviews and all sorts of things from the media, and Brian, of course, being my boss, would get, he would get a lot of them, and then he would dump ones to me that he didn't want to handle. And one of the ones that got dumped to me was an advertising person from Chicago called up and said, we're doing it was actually after Halley at some point. It may have been in the 90s or something like that, but they were doing a commercial on television for Wrigley's Spearmint gum, chewing gum. And they had already put this together, and there were two people facing each other at night, and a meteor or bright fireball goes shooting behind one person. So the person facing is able to see it and says, oh, look, it's Halley's Comet. And of course he turns around, and by the time he turns around to look, it's gone. And so someone at their company said, I don't know if that's what a comet does. You should call an expert. So I got this phone call, and they described it to me on the phone, and I said, yeah, that's not a comet. That might be a little piece of a comet, but that's something in our atmosphere. That's a meteor burning up in our atmosphere, and you really shouldn't call it Halley's Comet. And they said, and the person who called me said, I thought as much. Okay, thank you very much. And it actually came on at the Super Bowl, the commercial. It was a very big commercial. It was very widely seen around the world, and they left it as it was. And I found out the reason was that they got into the room and they said, well, the scientists say that's not a comet. And what they said was, well, you know what? Everybody knows Halley's Comet, and nobody will care.
We care.
Yes, I
Yes.
know.
Yeah,
That's what we're up against, right?
absolutely.
Well, it's the same with pronouncing the names of stars correctly. Like everybody says Beetlejuice for Betelgeuse. And it's like, hang on a minute, Beetlejuice is a movie with Mr. Keaton in it. And then you have to, then you jump in with the correct pronunciation, trying to give it all the Arabic parts of it as well.
Right.
And they're looking at you totally shocked. And they ask you what it means. And I said, as I remember, it means the pit of the sheep, the armpit of a sheep or something. And the reaction gets kind of interesting. It's, oh, fair enough. Oh, it's still Beetlejuice to me. And because I also remember Patrick Moore did a thing about Tycho Brahe, and his godson, Chris Lintott, called him Tycho. And Patrick turned around very quickly with, no, it's Ticker. And okay, yes, and he said, I've just been told off by my godfather for getting the name wrong. And that went out on the BBC. So that was put out on the show they were doing about the whole thing. So yeah,
But
people get stuck into.
I was going to say, the trouble with Lintott is, Lintott, he actually calls it Beetlejuice. He did it the other day on the Sky at Night when they were talking about sunspots, and we could see it, and and he actually still calls it Beetlejuice. So he's not learned. The boy's not learned.
Oh well.
Well, we have a problem with comet names, of course, too. And many comet names come from non-English speaking countries, like Schwachman, right?
Yeah.
You're talking about SW1, or there's SW2, SW3. Of course, those numerals have all gone away now. But yeah, we have a lot of different names that from different parts of the world, and you go to a meeting on comets, and you'll hear the same comet pronounced 4 different ways, depending on who's.
I can imagine. Do you think that's do you think some of the romance of the comet names have gone now and then, Dan? Because obviously, as you say, you know, we used to get Comet Levy, or we used to get Comet Austin, but now it's Pan-STARRS, Neowise, Pan-STARRS, Neowise. It's hard. I mean, when I'm looking through data, when somebody throws a Pan-STARRS comet at me, for example, like the T2 we read out a little bit earlier on, that thing's been around since, I don't know when, 2017. 4 years we've been observing this. And then somebody throws another Pan-STARRS at me, and I just get so confused.
Well, that's why we have to use the designation. You can't use the name. You know, the names are worthless. And you sent me a message earlier today, Neil, about you know, one of the Leonard comets. Well, Leonard has found a bunch of comets, and you're like, Dan, you know, I'm interested in this comet Leonard. I'm like, which one? I mean, he discovered 2 in the last couple of months, right?
No, I mean A1. Yeah, sorry.
right. But you know, but Pan-STARRS especially, you know, and you know, Brian did the right thing when he came in with this new scheme. Up until about 1994, I think, is when we made the change to the new designation scheme and the new name scheme, and that was in doing by attaching permanent numbers to the beginning of comets, of short period comets. You did away with the need to have these numbers afterwards, like Schwarzman-Bachmann 1, 2, 3, Wilt 1, 2, 3, whatever. And of course, you know, old school people who are used to the old comets before the change, you know, some people still cling to those, but we formally dropped those numbers as soon as we came in with the new scheme because they're redundant. And of course, if you could imagine today with all the Pan-STARRS comets, what would you have? Pan-STAR 782? I mean, you know, so we use the designations, and in doing archives, if you take a look at our archives of whether it's photometry or astrometry or orbits, you only have the designations in there. You don't have the names, right? So designations are the way that you identify observations, the way you sort them. The names are just there as a colorful human aspect to it. But even when you start to get 700 Pan-STARRS comets, you kind of glaze over. Yes, and it's and of course the problem, getting back to what you were originally saying about, you know, Comet Levy, Comet Austin, the problem is that these surveys now go so deep. There are so many of them. They scan the sky every single clear night, and they scoop things up before amateurs can get them. And it's not to say that there aren't going to be any amateur discoveries. One of the things I think that was still holding out was for amateurs was not having a big survey in the Southern Hemisphere, but now we're coming up with 2 Atlas telescopes, and I believe the LSST is coming online very shortly, and LSST is claiming they're going to get down to 25th or 26th magnitude. And, you know, I don't know what that's going to do for comets, because, you know, most comets that are 26 magnitude are not showing any kind of cometary activity. So it's going to be a zoo out there. But yeah, it's sad to see the amateurs, you know, like David, not being able to do this. I mean, David, you were in a golden time when, you know, when there was still photography going on and we were just getting into CCD observations. That was a good time.
It was, and but I do object to the law that's recently been passed. I was pulled over the other day, and the policeman came to me and said, "How do you pronounce this particular comet?" And I told him it's pronounced Halley, and he said, "You are being given $100 fine because you mispronounced it. It has to be Holly or Halley, but you can't call it Haley." And so, but I think that this, you know, I don't think you need to fine people for that or give them tickets for mispronouncing comet names.
No. Did you know, David, that you've gotten the ICQ, so you maybe know about that, that we did this paper on the Edmund part of Halley, his first name, as to whether
I do remember that. Yes,
Edmund with a U or Edmund with an O, and
I do recall that.
Yes, it was published both ways, and I think we ended up saying, well, he used the O more often than the U. I think. I don't remember now.
Well, in those days, spelling was not really a priority.
Right. It was sort of
wasn't in Shakespeare's time.
Right.
In fact, Go on, David.
No, I'm done.
But
I
anyway,
was going
Neil,
to say
you were-
was,
I was just saying, you were talking about Halley's Comet, that you would like to go see at one of those early times when it was really bright. And,
Yeah.
those of us who were, assigned to live in this generation to see Halley's Comet in 1986, of course, it was one of the worst returns in the last 2 millennia. It was on the far side of the sun when it came to perihelion, and those who are around in 2061 are going to get a much better view of it. So
I hope so. I hope to be here still, touch wood. He says, touching a chair. All I was going to simply say was a lot of us, because of the arguments over pronunciation, went back to looking at Newton's notes on how people's names were actually spelt back then. So that I think that's one of the things Patrick also did. He went and looked up. I think it was not only Newton, but who was the other chap? It's late at night here, so synapses are not working. Who actually helped finance Principia being published?
Flamsteed?
No,
No.
I think he was one of the Boswell or Johnson, I think, perhaps, because they were writing about the comet and about the discovery and stuff, and the mathematics being done. And it was interesting to see how they actually did the spelling. And yes, the spelling was an awful lot looser then. Having seen how they write fish in those days compared to how we write it today, it's definitely a much different kettle of fish, if you'll pardon the pun.
Yeah.
I've got a question for you, Dan. Of all the comets that you have seen in your lifetime, which is your favorite?
Oh, the thing is with comets, they're so different one from another. So, that's hard because, Comet West was big for me. I didn't see a Kiyoseki. I was too young. I saw Comet West in 76, which was really neat. And we had good skies down in North Carolina at that time. That was a big comet. I was already heavily into comets at that point. First comet that I saw was Kohoutek. That was my first comet. I was really drawn in. That was a lot of hoopla. That was going to be the comet of the century. And I thought it was kind of a neat comet. But Halley's Comet was interesting. We went to the Southern Hemisphere for that a couple of times. Went to Brazil, went to Australia for that one. It was interesting. It wasn't spectacular, but it was Halley's Comet or Halley's Comet. And, it was, you had that connection to all the previous generations of humans going back millennia. That was really cool. Comet Hale-Bopp, of course, was really cool because it has the longest record in history of naked eye visibility over close to a couple of years, I think. It was a very long time. It wasn't spectacularly bright because, again, it was on the other side of the sun at perihelion from us, but it was very interesting. Comet Yakitaki in 96, amazing overhead if you had a dark sky with the tail stretched halfway across the sky. Very intrinsically a very faint comet. Iras-Araki-Alcock in 83. Wonderful comet, just big, round, comet with no huge comet because it was so close to the Earth, but no tail, going right through the Big Dipper. That was really cool. It's hard to pick a specific comet because they all kind of add up. McNaught's comet in 2007, which I saw naked eye in broad daylight, David, from Cambridge. Before, it was spectacular in the south, not in the north, but it was as bright as Venus. Right before perihelion, before it went south, and
that was wonderful.
That was unbelievable to see that.
My favorite too. I have two favorite comets. One of them was Yakitaki, and I remember seeing Yakitaki with its head not far from Polaris, and the tail stretched all the way to Corvus, 110-degree tail. And I got a note the next day from someone out in California who said it's impossible. No comet can have a tail that long. And then when the Ulysses spacecraft went past Jupiter, it detected fragments of the tail of Yakitaki there. And he wrote back, he said, I guess I was wrong. You could see it that long.
Yeah.
The other one, my favorite, is Holmes. That
Oh,
one
yes.
was so bright.
Yeah.
Looked like a star, but it just shone up like that. It was brilliant.
Huge outburst.
On the
Yes.
2
I've got
million
an image of it.
times. It was
Yeah.
just a wonderful thing to see. So those are my two favorite. Plus all the others I've seen. Let me see.
Yeah. Well, David, I have to add in one comet that is definitely unique. And, I didn't actually see the comet myself, but I saw the remains of it. The comet that went into Jupiter that your name is on. That was amazing. And, that was a case where you and I had a debate, and you were right and I was wrong. And that was that you said that you thought it might be visible in small telescopes before it got to Jupiter, before it went into Jupiter. And I said, no way you're going to be able to see this with a small telescope. And boy, was I wrong.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that, but we almost went to the, what do they call that thing with Alexander Hamilton, the duel. We almost had a duel about that one. That was kind of an interesting time, but we've gotten over that. But SL9 were two moments for me. One of them was during the moment of impact. I was sitting at a press conference that morning, and Jean wasn't in that conference then. Jean and Carolyn were not, but I was, and answering questions with a group of other scientists. And Jean came in and started waving madly at me. And I looked at the lady sitting next to me and I said, nothing is going to get me out of this press conference. And she nodded. And then Shane came up to me and said, we got to go. And I said, I'm new at this press conference. And he said, we've been invited to the White House to meet the president. And I looked at the lady sitting next to me. I said, accept that. And the other thing about SL9 was right after it was discovered in March of '93, I went back home from that momentous observing run. The same night, I had a 9-hour drive from Palomar back to where I live in Arizona. And as soon as I got home, I set up my 40-centimeter telescope and looked at Jupiter and saw the comet faintly right next to it. And that's one of the most momentous memories I have of that particular comet. But thanks for mentioning that, Dan.
Yeah, definitely a very special comet. And
yeah,
you don't think of that normally when you think of like, oh, what's the greatest comet you've seen? You tend to think of bright, spectacular. That was spectacular for what it did, and what you could see on Jupiter. The fact that you could see those black spots on Jupiter, as each piece went in, boom, 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 it was just amazing.
For months they persisted.
Yes, that's right.
And of course, it helped us solve a mystery on Callisto with a chain of cratering that was so unusual. Now that literally that was the light bulb that says this is what caused it. Something like this in the past had already happened, and instead of hitting Jupiter, the fragments had collided in a line on Callisto. I've said in the past, I believe there's a similar crater chain on the moon and certainly on the Earth.
Yeah, there is the Davy Catena.
Yeah,
in the
and
middle of the crater Davy, there's a catena a chain of craters. Sorry, Dan.
No, that's fine. I think it's not a coincidence that we in our short lifetime, if you think in the short lifetime of the solar system, the length of the solar system and comets, and that in our short lifetime, we were able to see this. Yeah, I think it suggests not that it was just coincidence, but that it's a relatively common thing.
It probably is. Geologically, it's common. Not in the span of a human lifetime, but certainly not, but in geological time, a fairly common experience. One of the interesting other stories about SL9 was that I had a little bit of advance warning, I have to admit, that the comet, something big was going to happen, because just before I left for our observing run in May of 1993, Brian sent me an email and he said, David, you might want to watch your emails in the next few days because something really big is about to be announced that might have something to do with a comet that you're familiar with. And I kind of just forgot about it until the message actually came out a few days after our observing run began. And Brian actually did what he said he would do. I asked him one night at dinner, Brian, what would you do if a comet was going to collide with the Earth? And he said that I would simply send out a circular with the deltas, and anyone can calculate how the deltas lower until they become less than the Earth's radius. Then you know there'll be a collision. And that's precisely what he did with announcing that the delta J becoming less than the radius of Jupiter.
Right.
And I noticed that and I thought he got what he wanted. I was so excited for him and for it. But in the next circular, he translated it for us. And he said that there was a significant probability that there would be a collision of most, if not all, of the fragments. And it turned out he was certainly right about that. He was right about almost everything, wasn't he, Dan?
Well, he was pretty good. You know, I think you know what he did his PhD thesis on? Brian.
No.
Brian Marsden did his PhD thesis on the satellites of Jupiter. And, you know, and these were temporarily captured as satellites of Jupiter before they hit Jupiter, right? So they were no longer orbiting the sun at the time that they hit Jupiter. And so Brian was in a position kind of uniquely, you know, sense to be able to handle that. It was a very tough celestial mechanics problem. And, you know, to deal with an object like that went so close to Jupiter that it was pulled apart into so many pieces and then spiraled down into Jupiter. That's a non-trivial computing problem. So.
I have to admit, I did enjoy the book Impact, which was the story of Shoemaker Levy 9. That to me is a fascinating book, and I think everybody who's interested in comets should really read it, because it really does show you how to do things and how things work.
Well,
Neil?
it was.
Yes, absolutely.
It was an important part of my life, and it certainly cemented the friendship that I had and still have with Carolyn, the friendship with Jean and Carolyn that I had. It certainly cemented that. But for me, it was as much of a personal story as it was a scientific story and a historical one. But it certainly did an awful lot for me, and it gave me a feeling about that I still have when I go out every night, look up at the night sky, and I look up to see if anything's different from what was the night before. And that's a very important concept, a very important thing to look for.
Yep. One of these days, we're going to have a bright Milky Way supernova again. We're long overdue for one.
Yes, we are. Yeah.
Where you go out and you just know right away, okay, this isn't right. That's not an airplane. What is that? So we're overdue for another bright comet too, I think.
Yeah.
We don't have any really bright ones on the radar right now, but of course we could get one at any time coming in.
And
I remember last July the 4th, it was actually the morning of the 5th. I went outside trying to see Neowise and couldn't see it, couldn't find it. The sky was getting brighter, the moon was full and it was about to set. And So I got a pair of binoculars, and I found the star Capella just kind of up in the northeast. And I moved the binoculars down from Capella, down and down, and suddenly, bam, there is Comet Neowise, this magnificent, beautiful, flaming comet, just sitting there. Boy, I practically jumped out of my skin. It was so exciting to see that.
That's the brightest one
Yeah.
we've had in a little while.
Yeah.
2020 F3.
That was fun to image. I had to image it remotely down south. I was operating on a telescope out of I think it's just south of Santiago. But of course, recently in the news, there's an Atlas comet which is going to be captured by Jupiter, I believe, and it has a chart. Either it's going to be a sun diver, or it's going to be expelled from the solar system and be an interstellar comet. I think it was Atlas LD2. It's on the JPL.
It's got a couple of close approaches to Jupiter.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, I have to. I don't know when that was last observed. Let's see here. It was last observed the end of December.
Dan, you may want to turn on your video so that those who are watching and listening to our recording will be able to see you.
Are we going to be putting the video online too, Neil, Nick?
Well, we might as well, because Neil and I and Mary have been planning to do a video one, and this seems to be the perfect one to do, really.
Okay, I didn't want Neil to feel bad because he said his camera doesn't work.
Yeah, my camera is no good. Yeah, I know, but you take all the glory. I don't mind. I'll sit back in the shadows and just interject randomly.
Yeah, in your Galaxy A40 shadow there.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
I have to admit, it's going to get really interesting, because they believe Jupiter somewhere in the past did actually capture another interstellar visitor, because one of its, I think it's one of the Centaurs, I could be wrong, was actually captured and is now a Jupiter family comet. But it may have had an extra solar system origin in the first instance.
Well, we talked for many years about why we were seeing so many objects coming from what appears to be the outer Oort cloud, but we never saw a definitive comet on a hyperbolic orbit, an original hyperbolic orbit. So when you compute an orbit of a comet in real time, you can get a hyperbolic orbit very easily with a lot of comets that have nearly parabolic orbits. But usually, especially in prior to recent times, you could always hand wave away a hyperbolic orbit saying, oh, the observations aren't that good, the astrometry is not that good, the uncertainty is such that, you can't really say if, it's a hyperbolic comet. And then they have two objects, in such close time, just in the last couple of years, that are on unequivocal original hyperbolic orbits and zipping right through the solar system, on hyperbolic orbits, has been pretty mind-boggling. But in a sense, I talked for a long time, especially with Brian Marsden. We used to talk about, why aren't we seeing them? Why don't we see them? Well, maybe there aren't any. Well, there have to be, comets that are floating between stars, right? They can't, because we eject so many comets, largely due to close approaches like, in particular, Jupiter, and certainly also Saturn and the outer planets, fainter comets that we can't see. The solar system is ejecting comets on hyperbolic orbits all the time with these close approaches. So why aren't we seeing any? And, it's too bad that Brian didn't live to see these two objects, because Brian would have really loved them. And of course, the Oumuamua, right? The one that was discovered by Pan-STARRS, that was not cometary. it's really an oddball. And, we looked at that closely, and, it's not, it doesn't have strong non-gravitational forces, but they're there when you include the whole arc. The residuals improve by about 1/10 or 2/10 of an arc second when you when you allow for non-gravitational forces. So there's something odd there because it didn't show any cometary activity. And usually when you see non-gravitational forces in a comet, you've got some pretty obvious cometary activity usually, right? It's very unusual. And the only cases where we've ever seen a minor planet that doesn't show cometary activity, that doesn't have gravitational, that shows non-gravitational forces, are objects that go within the orbit of Mercury. And then they're resolved by allowing for relativity. But this isn't the case for these two objects. Of course, Borisov's comet was clearly cometary. But where did it come from? And where did Oumuamua come from? And of course, we have a former chairman of the astronomy department here at Harvard, Arvi Loeb, who's just come out with a book, and he's exploring the idea that it's maybe it was created by some aliens or something as a spacecraft. And it's one of those real oddballs. Of course, most astronomers won't have anything to do with that, most serious astronomers. But that's because we're trained not to do that. We're trained to say, oh, UFOs, yeah, unidentified flying objects. Of course they exist. They're unidentified flying objects. You won't find any astronomer other than Alan Hynek, maybe, saying that they're flying saucers from, beyond the solar system. UFOs can be explained. They're UFOs because they haven't been explained, or until they're explained, right? So that's very interesting. And I assume that we will see more of these, because you're not going to just see two objects on hyperbolic orbits in 2 years and not see any more for the next 1,000 years, right? There are more where that came from. And the thing is that now that we've got telescopes that are going fainter and fainter, problem with Oumuamua was that it was a very faint object, and we have a very short arc on it. It was only observable with large telescopes. So, as we get fainter and fainter, we're probably going to see more of these objects on hyperbolic orbits.
I think Hubble actually looked at Borisov last week, so they're still following that one, aren't they?
I hadn't heard that they did that. I hope they provide some astrometry. That would be good.
Definitely.
I have to admit, it kind of makes life a lot more interesting now that we've actually proven that 2 visitors to the solar system are interstellar. And I think there's more people out there now looking, really, because it's been proven to exist. The community accepts the interstellar comets and pieces of rock coming through the solar system. So people are now more willing to, when someone finds something, they're now more willing to accept, yeah, okay, fine. And of course, looking back historically with one of the Jupiter groups, that is the composition, I believe, was said to be not the same as a typical solar system comet that would have come in from the Oort cloud from here. So who knows? Maybe when we actually get to go to Jupiter's area, we could actually perhaps try and visit one of these comets. I would certainly love 29P to get a visit, because I think that could tell us an awful lot, because it has these wonderful outbursts, and they can be predicted, so we know when to pull the spacecraft back when it's there. So as I say, I think that's one of my, and of course we've got the ICE missions coming out of the European Space Agency, 3 probes ready and waiting to intercept a comet. And I think they're talking about a launch in the next 2 to 3 years. So they'll be sitting there at 3 different Lagrange points, just waiting for something to come in that they can actually follow and latch onto, and tell us perhaps more about the history of our solar system. I think that's the greatest thing about comets. We learn so much about what the early solar system was like from them, that every time we get to see what we get one now that can be scientifically looked at with the instruments that we have now, and as I say, we're going down to magnitude 20 plus, it means we have more opportunity to actually study perhaps a more pristine part of our history.
And what's another thing that's interesting is all of the trans-Neptunian objects that we're finding. You know, now we have telescopes. They're finding these objects down to 25th magnitude routinely, and there are so many objects out beyond Neptune, some of which are in very interesting orbits.
And of course
there's the question: is there another larger planet out there somewhere, a distant planet? That's the question that still unanswered. It kind of boggles the mind to think that there might be something out there, but that's very large. But we don't
What do
know.
you think about Planet 9, Dan? Do you think there's anything there?
I'm open-minded. I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that is. You know, the thing is that nothing surprises me, though. You know, all of the things that I've seen in my career, including these two objects on hyperbolic orbits, and including your comet that hit Jupiter. You know, and nothing surprises me. You know, anything can happen as far as I'm concerned. You remember when Charon was discovered, the first satellite of Pluto. You know, Brian was a skeptic and everything. The observations weren't confirming. I can't believe it. And Brian did not believe that Pluto would have a satellite. You know, because Brian always believed that Pluto was very small. How can Pluto have a satellite? And when Christie found it in 1978. And of course, it turned out to be, you know, yes, it was indeed a new discovery. And then when we started getting satellites of minor planets, you know, Brian was no, it's got to be a mistake. You know, there's no way that we can have satellites of minor planets and asteroids. And now, you know, they're a dime a dozen, right? All over the place. So yeah, it's an interesting world out there.
It certainly is. I was thinking over the last couple of hours as we've enjoyed this very interesting session of the first time I ever gave a lecture of any sort, which was to my 6th grade class in Roslyn School. And I talked about comets. I was 11 years old, or 12 years old. And I talked about comets. And there wasn't very much to say about them, except that Halley is not going to come for a very long time. So we don't have to worry about it. And now, all these decades later, we've had Halley's Comet. We've had other comets that I could not have dreamed about. But still, the magic to me is still there. The joy of going outside and looking up at comets and seeing what they are. And because when I got interested in comets, it wasn't just the science. In fact, it was the history, the literature, the impacts, really not yet. The impacts I really didn't get interested in till just before SL9 for obvious reasons. But the rest of it has been a long-standing interest. And it's really so much fun to be sitting here with you and talking for so long. Even though we had a lot of problems getting started this afternoon, I think we've had a very, very good session. I really enjoyed being a part of it, and I'm honored to be with all of you, with Neil and Nick, Dan, and all of you. And I'm not saying we have to end it, but I'm just saying, I just wanted to let you know how much fun I've had doing all of this.
Well, I thought that our Zoom session would have been cut off about an hour ago, actually.
Yeah, I thought so too.
It's interesting that it's still working.
It's still working fine, yeah.
I saw the little box come up that says, "Hooray! You've been given an unlimited license for this show."
Oh, they must realize, you know, the importance of our conversation.
Well, maybe. I hope so. But I have one more little quote to read. It's from my favorite writer other than Shakespeare. And that was Leslie Peltier in Starlight Nights. And what he says about comets. You know that Leslie discovered 12 comets, 10 of which have his name attached to them. But what he said about them in just 3 lines is so wonderful. I just wanted to share it with all of you. I had watched a dozen comets, hitherto unknown, slowly creep across the sky as each one signed its sweeping flourish in the guest book of the sun. That man knew how to write poetically, and he knew how to put pen to paper and make things just fly off the page, like the comets he found.
Yeah, I wish I had met him.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say, if anybody, when everybody's watching this, yes, that is actually a backwards clock from Denmark, from a place called Aarhus. So that is genuinely backwards. It's nothing to do with the camera. It is genuinely a backwards clock.
Wow, it's almost midnight there.
Yeah.
Yes. We're nearly on Friday.
Yes, we're nearly on Friday. And I tell you what, I came off a 12-hour shift yesterday, and I have been so looking forward to this show.
Well, I'm glad that
great.
we were able to pull it off. Our listeners, viewers may not, they don't know that this almost didn't come off, but we made it work.
Yes.
I think that's the greatest thing, is that we get you, both of you, on the show, and it just goes. And I think that's, for me, this is the best thing. Neil and I don't have to really say much or do much, because the conversation between you as our guests is, I think, perhaps the greatest thing, because it really, you guys are talking about obviously a lot of what's in our minds already, and it's so much fun for us just to sit back and listen to you guys speak about it.
Yes,
I'm glad. I hope the listeners enjoy it, and I enjoy talking with David and with both of you guys, Neil and Nick. It's been a pleasure. You guys are good hosts. You have a great podcast here, and I hope that a lot more people, pick this up and that you have continued success with it.
Well, actually, what we've
Nick, if you could send me your email address, I will try to upload the file to Dropbox and send it to you.
Brilliant, thank you. Then I can get it up onto YouTube, and I can actually get the audio side of it off as well, because I know some people can't. They actually listen to the show driving to work. So particularly in Australia, and I know that a lot of people in places like the Philippines share the show literally from phone to phone, because I gave it to one of my friends there, and she said that one of the shows actually went around the whole of her daughter's class, literally sharing it peer to peer. So yeah, we get about.
We do.
Yeah.
Just like COVID. We're all over the world. Oh. I have to drop a bad joke in at some point that I normally get banned for.
Well, as I say, I think we were only originally planning to. Yes, we're going to have to. And next time we have to get Mary on it as well.
Yes, Mary, with her tattoo. Because Dan wants
yes. We haven't seen her comet tattoo. That's right.
And we want to see this, yes. I think I have seen it. Nick, can you remember where it is on her body?
No, I don't.
Okay. Just wondered.
I'm sure that.
I think we've lost Nick there, unless he's.
Nick?
I'm here. Nick froze. You see, he's talking about Mary.
Well, I am going to have to go because I have to go to dinner.
Yes.
My
course.
wife has been waiting for me. Went a little longer than we expected. We've been on for
Oh,
3
oh,
hours.
dear.
Please give her my very best, and from Wendy as well.
Yes.
I will do that. It was good seeing you all, and thanks for everything that you've done, Neil and Nick, and
Yeah,
David. We'll
thank you,
have to
Dan.
catch up some more.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay, take
Okay.
care, Dan.
Adios.
Bye.
Bye-bye.